Hello, folks. Welcome to a Cannaconvo episode of Cannabis Last Week, brought to you by Global Cannabis Times. I'm your host, John Puro. I have the honor and pleasure of sitting here with Gary Santo, CEO of Tilt Holdings. We're going to have a very, very exciting conversation about many topics dear to my heart, right? I've decided in this industry, I'm just not just a people person, I'm a pot people person. And this is a like-minded one right here. So, and I'll say that the topics we're going to discuss, proposed by you and your team, exactly what I think people are going to find interesting with where the industry is heading. So, Gary, please, just to give a little bit of a bio on the background of your route into the industry and how that kind of informs your thinking right now as you guide your company through this.
Sure. So I probably spent about 25 years working at different startups and companies going through pretty big transformations where they were one company and then they maybe did a merger or something transformational and had to reinvent themselves and reintroduce themselves. And they were all publicly traded companies. Yeah. So a friend of mine had talked about the cannabis industry. You've got to check this out. They could use folks like you. And look, when I was young, at the start of my career, I used to look at guys like me and wonder why we existed because we could all figure it out on our own. Now I understand a lot better, and it's been fun to really dust off things that I've probably done in my prior life as second nature and introduce them here into cannabis where there are some pieces that still work from a business perspective, right? And how you build that company out, how you lean into the market, how you react to what the market's telling you, and how you deliver product to the consumer. You just have to pay attention, and put in the right checks and balances each step of the way.
Got it. Yeah. I agree in the sense, right, that it's still an immature market in a lot of ways, right? Even the mature states, right, like California, for example, they're still evolving. They're still tweaking regulations, right? You have the elimination of the cultivation tax to try and address issues there, not as much as you would think, right, because revenue neutral. But, when it's an immature market where you're in a position of power like you are to help kind of guide that market, right, and gain the leg up, applying principles from outside, right? This is a CPG, industry. I think it's going to kind of help guide it. And there's a lot of opportunity there, right? There's still such an open competitive market. We're still in early stages of consolidation, right? Innovation, IP can help be a differentiator. Oh, and strategy, right? And that's one of the ones that I want to touch upon with you in terms of, how you're making certain moves in specific states and products. So, one thing that you said in terms of something you wanted to touch upon, and this is near and dear to my heart as an IP lawyer, brand geek, right? And such an important thing in the industry is, when you are, an MSO as you, right, in different states and brands are, kind of all important. And I was literally just having a conversation like this with the head of a big California brand, right? What are your considerations in terms of putting in your stores house brands versus other established, say, name brands in the industry, right? What is the thinking that dictates that as you enter into a specific state, as you're more mature in a state? I'm just kind of curious.
Sure. I think Tilt was a little late to the MSO game in that it had a bit of a rebirth. It went public in late 2018, early 2019, had a bunch of different ideas and designs, basically ran out of capital at one point and had to course correct. And a different leadership team was brought in. I came in mid 2020. And we were faced with either, do we go after the traditional MSO model, build our own brand, push that in our own stores and try to get into that rat race? Or is there another way to go about doing this? And what we found is we believe CPG is the future. We think that there will be a Coke, there will be a Pepsi, there'll be different layers. Do we know who those folks are today? No. We know there's a lot of great brands that are coming out of California and Oregon and Washington State and Colorado, hyper competitive markets. They've carved out a niche for themselves, but are there deep enough brand architecture to really sustain, right? It could be a lifestyle brand. We work with Old Pal, right? It could be, a social equity brand. We work with Black Buddha. Would you want to stay away from a sort of that celebrity type products? That's just a flash in the pan. If there's no depth and it's just a name, 6 months from now, that'll be the stuff doing BOGOs. So when we look at how to manage what we sell and what we promote, whether it's on the wholesale side or we have 3 retail stores in Massachusetts, we're sort of the flip of most MSOs. Typically, they'll promote about 70% of their own product and 30% of some third-party cultivated product on that they kind of go out and source on their own. We're inverted. About 30% of our shelf space is for our own products. The balance is for all of our brand partner products and also for those customers who buy from us. So we're B2B. So other MSOs or local growers, we will showcase their products and allow them to extend their shelf space. And that has served us really well because I think, number one, it gets you better consistency to the customer. So the end user, the actual end consumer starts to now recognize brands in more than one state. And more importantly, the way we approach it is making sure that we work with those brands, not just to be a white label licensor. I don't want the name. I don't want the logo. I could do that myself. I want to know that there's depth of brand, that they're going to put people in market to help create that depth of brand and the awareness and go out and activate in the stores. And then we'll work together to help create the products because you can't really take the same product from California and bring it to Massachusetts. Very little of it will work. The formulation, the packaging, you name it. So really doing our best to make sure that when you try Old Pal in California and then you come and get Old Pal from our shop in Massachusetts, it's as close to the same experience you could possibly get.
I think conservatively in what you said, there are about 8 different things I'd like to jump off of, right? Or celebrity brands, including ones that actually literally have 2.0, right, in their name to signify the fact that we're in the second generation, or also in terms of, the California brands crossing over. So I think it's interesting what you said in terms of, well, one, being later in the game as an MSO in terms of how the market is developed and the amounts of, money and checks to cut. That could play out to your advantage in certain respects. And I'm curious as to know, your thoughts in the 30-70, right, being inverted. Is part of that consideration, people on the East Coast know the California brands. When I go camping with my buddies, right, and some guy saw his, guy before he came, he breaks out California brands, right? So there is that visibility here already, though I think that there will be East Coast brands rising because of, pride considerations, different things that resonate. But, I'm wondering, so do you think that the 70-30 is a function of being, I guess, later to the game, or just like it's a way of differentiating yourself, right? That there is also that association with quality. And I moderated a panel at last Benzinga with California brands. And what they found was, if you succeed in that California crucible, they were shocked every time they went into another state. And it's a function of finding the right partner, right, to have that associated quality, not just down to the visceral feeling of the packaging with the magnetic click when it closes, the actual quality. They were shocked at how well they would climb up in shares, right, because they've refined the product in a good place, the genetics, different things. So to a certain extent, do you think that, the evolution and when you hit certain places has informed that strategy, in terms of how you approach it with the brands? And do you think that shifts in the future, possibly, right, for economies of scale?
Well, I think if you're an MSO with your own brand and you're massive vertical, you have retail stores everywhere. First off, you're competing with most of the other shops you're trying to sell your brands into. So good luck. Yeah. But you're also trying to feed that beast where I have to promote my own because I make the most margin on my own. Yeah. When you're more of a B2B play the way we are more asset light, so we can be nimble. What we're trying to do is put together a portfolio of products. I equate to being the Frito-Lay truck. Yeah. I want to have something at every price point, every quality point, and every form factor. So this way, the consumer has the widest possible spectrum of choices. For the longest time, everybody went for the upper left quadrant, all about price, potency, high end quality. Yep. Well, you're not always going to have that kind of money to go after that. You're shutting out a huge piece of the population. Got it. And people who just go after the connoisseurs, that's great, but that's not really where the target market is anymore. So it's having that sort of depth of a product portfolio that you really can only get when you work with third-party brands and truly understand where they fit in. And sometimes we have to tell brands, no, you're too much like the other brands in the market. Do I need a 5th or 6th or 7th infused pre-roll? Probably not. Now if it's at a different price point or there's something specific, or something unique about that pre-roll, sure, that will make sense. Yeah. So,
all right. So yes, you're preaching, and the strategy preaches to many things that I love for a number of reasons, right? Because look, what is one of the largest issues that we're dealing with in this entire industry is the legacy market, right? And how do you cross it over and how do you compete with that? And it's a function of, I forgot off the top of my head, it's 4 or 5 right now, but price, how it gets to the consumer, right? Delivery versus on-site consumption, right? Mimicking, say in New York, they're used to having delivery, but product diversification, right? That is, and also knowing the safety of the product and the consistency of the product that you can't get necessarily in, that illicit market. And so that's where I think it gets very, very interesting, right? Because like you're saying, you're putting together a suite of quality products right? That scratch every need in every, consumer base. I talked to, brands like, Wana, right? And they try to have that product range. So now let's get into a little bit, some specifics. I had the pleasure last night, right, of trying toast, right? And so let's talk about this, right? There is this focus, covering the industry in the podcast. There is this focus on high potency, and it creates other issues in the industry like lab shopping, which I'm going to do a deep dive at some point soon. High potency, right? Even though THC content isn't necessarily indicative, right? Because the terpene profiles, all that, but low dose, low potency. Like, I just feel like there's going to be this shift, and you touched upon it because you said connoisseurs. I call them cannasseurs. Everything's a pun for me. Cannasseurs and cannacurious, right? And there are people, like a demographic, people I may or may not be married to, who will never smoke something, right? But when a beverage was around, a low dose beverage, not intimidating because it's lower dose, we'll give it a try, right? And so these toast things were, they were low dose. I tried one. It was 2-to-1 CBD to THC, and it was like an individualized. It was in a cigarette form factor, right? And so I see that, and I think, there is something inherently social in the way that we consume this drug, built into the culture of it. And so this seems to make so much sense to me. Essentially, also when you have on-site consumption as a differentiator, the illicit market doesn't have that, right? And so love to learn more about the thinking, right? Because like as I agree with all this, I love to know more about the thinking behind it.
Sure. I mean, we talk about this, about even doing microdosing on edibles, because we're fortunate our edible kitchen produces some of the best edibles I've ever had. And you want to eat more than one, but if they're 5 milligrams each, good luck. Yeah. I've done that by accident a few times, and the ears have been ringing, and that just hasn't been fun. But if you could microdose it or something, so you can actually have it in a more social, acceptable setting, it comes back to use case. If you just want to be episodic, right, and you're just going for the maximum bang for the buck, you're probably also the person who's buying the 110 proof Captain Morgan's or something like that. You're aiming for the stars. But if you just want to have that social feel, why do you drink beer sometimes and not do a shot of tequila? Right. There's a reason. So I think the more we can do to sort of have everything up and down the spectrum, I'm hearing more and more, even from the California OGs, that, the high potency, you don't always get that, right? You can swing for the fence or get it once in a while. We'd rather just have a consistent, give me a mid-20s consistent every time with a really solid terpene profile. And I will take that over the 35% testing flower. So it's just bringing it into more of a mainstream allowable use, and putting aside all the past misconceptions really about what it was to smoke flower, and you're just going to get stoned, and it's like I'm going out to get drunk. I don't go out to get drunk every time I tip a glass back. Why should I go out to get out of my shorts every time I decide to smoke a joint?
Exactly.
So
right. And we compare ourselves to alcohol in so many respects, right? We make our arguments about why it's a more dangerous drug and everything, right? But socially, right, what are we trying to emulate, right? We're trying to not just whether it's on-site consumption or whether it's you hanging out with your friends, do you guys all want to do 3 shots equivalent of 100 milligram thing and then sit around quiet because you're all stoned out of your minds? Or would you rather, just this social idea that you feel comfortable with something in your hand, like a low dose beverage or the cigarette equivalent? And people think about this as one drug. It is not, right? It changes depending upon how you consume it, down to beverages and whether they're nano-emulsified and how. Right. And also down to the idea of we're starting to play with different cannabinoids. We're in the early phases. You have CBD in that. I'm a CBG fan, right? That's my second favorite cannabinoid. Guess what the top one is? And, we're scratching the surface of other ones, and like applications like THCV that has potential weight loss implications. So I think that was something that I specifically, appreciated. And I think that that's going to do really well. So talking also about strategy and shifting to, another kind of topic that I thought was very interesting is, talking about different markets and how you enter different markets and where you see opportunities. I'm biased. I'm from New York. And I see in terms of how you explored something, one of the tribes there, right? With the Shinnecock Nation. So, and, it is a different model, right, for them. So I'm curious to know, how that came about, right? The thinking behind it. And, also, frankly, kind of an equity, fairness angle of it, how much that informed it as well.
Sure, sure. So, we had been looking for a way to see if we can expand and get into New York, and the price tag was just out of control. I mean, that's back when the deals were getting done for 75 million here, 45 million there, and that was just for the right to spend another 20 or 30 million to build or fix the facility you just bought.
Yeah.
And an investor had introduced us to Connor Green, who was acting as an advisor, and that's one of their business alliance is to actually advise Native American tribes. They had been working with the Shinnecock for quite some time to bring cannabis onto the sovereign land since I think 2015.
Yeah.
Now you could argue they could do whatever they want on their sovereign land, so they didn't have to do it this way.
Yeah.
But they knew the bigger play, if they were going to make a true economic engine, is to be able to coexist within the state of New York and wholesale on and off the reservation. And they wanted to build out their program to mimic the New York program, which trying to follow another regulatory group that's still writing the regulations is always a challenge, right? So it became obvious to us that they were thinking about this the way we'd want any business partner to think about it, let alone a sovereign nation that's underserved. Now, the chance we took and the risk we're continuing to take is this isn't one of these deals where we're somehow going to own this at the end of the rainbow. We're putting capital at risk. We'll spend between 18 and 20 million to build out these facilities. We have agreed to hire at least 100 folks who from the sovereign land and train them up because we know they probably don't have the skill sets to run a complex manufacturing shop. They have a great passion for the plant, tremendous knowledge, but we took them up to see our Massachusetts facility. It's like, oh, okay. So it's like a real production facility. So training them up so that they can someday run the facility. At the end of the day, they're going to own it. They own it on day one. They'll own it at the end, and they're going to get about 75% of the economics. So we're lending them some of that money to build. We will get paid back, of course, and we'll get paid a management fee. And if we do our job right, we will continue to have that partnership. And if not, well, then we deserve to be kicked off. But for us, it's about taking that risk and now working with them to not just build those facilities, but you talk about brands and strategy. They're going to want to put some type of it's Little Beach Harvest is the name of their cannabis shop. They want to have a Little Beach Harvest brand. And what does that mean? And how does it represent the Native American tribes as well as, hey, let's bring in all your brand partners because we know the people in the Hamptons would love to get their hands on Old Pal or 1906 or Toast.
Yeah.
So it's fun because you're educating. It's us taking our playbook from going into different states, but turning it a little bit because when you're dealing with a Native American tribe, it's a completely different ecosystem. Right. How you get things approved, the education that's required, and you realize how much of a change you're making to these people's lives. It's real, and that's what keeps it fun and exciting because otherwise opening up a new state is the most painful thing you'll ever do. This hasn't felt that way. Not at all.
All right. So I will always call them like I see it. That's the Staten Island in me and my mother's legacy. And I think that that's fantastic. Right. And I'll tell you why. Right. Because like I said, moderating the panel yesterday, right, this industry has a unique capacity to do good. Right. There was unequal enforcement of law borne by certain communities, horrible impacts. I've learned specific stories that will make you cry. Right. And so it is this opportunity here to do good. Right. And, the Native American tribes, I coincidentally work with some people in the Navajo Nation. Right. And I understand kind of the process of, education in certain respects. And so here's the thing that I think is so specifically admirable about it. Right. What we're trying to do in an overarching way here is I'm obsessed with the idea of the symbiosis between social equity, fairness, right? Where you want to see certain people succeed in this and, big business, right? And what I think is so specifically admirable and interesting about that is there are the big companies that have to jump through the specific hoops that the regulators in each state ask them to do. Right. Right now we know in New York that the people who are there, and you didn't even mention the 270 million that Scott's Miracle-Gro Griff Capital dropped in Etain before things played out a certain way this year. Right. And so this is not something that was required of you. Right. This was, and I will say this, right, having the opportunity, being lucky to sit down with people, of your stature in the industry. What I find is when I say that there's this unique capacity to good, I am constantly hardened by the fact that I meet people in your position who legitimately care, right, and come up with, but you're not being asked to do it. This is of your own initiative, right? You are doing good, right? Because you're finding symbiosis, like you said, it could work out for everyone. So tip my cap, just, call it like I see it. I guess we're right, close to the time. So should we end on that, like that flattering note, if there are any last points, you want to make, I also want to, open it up to you, but this was a real pleasure.
No,
let's end on that, right?
Yes.
this guy's great. His company, right? They're doing the right things they're in. I'm going to quote like The Bachelor. Not that I ever watched that with my wife, right? They're in it for the right reasons, right? There you go. So a real pleasure, an honor having you, Gary, and wish you the best with the continued development. And I'm going to do my customary sign off because I'm all about puns. Stay grassy, my buds, and I'll see you next episode.